Theme, setting, point of view. These are some of the main pillars that we've talked about in previous videos that can really mold or define the story you're going to tell. The other pillar that we haven't talked about yet, heroes. So now we want to talk about some of our favorite heroes and what makes them special to help you decide which ones you might want to take inspiration from for your story.
With pretty much every hero you want to write, the main thing that you want to look for is this idea of likability or empathy. But likability is very difficult to nail down because it's different from reader to reader. Despite this, I think likability can be mostly broken down into three main categories: desire, character, and competency. Desire is just what the character wants and why they can't have it. Character is just the reason that we are watching this character and the things that make them unique. And then there's competency. There's all different kinds of competency, whether you have a James Bond type that can kill any enemy that comes their way, or you have someone like Samwise Gamgee who is just competent at being an amazing person, an amazing friend. So we're going to break down 5 main archetypes of heroes and how these 3 different characteristics of heroes apply to those different archetypes and what we can learn from them.
The first type is going to be classical type. When you think about a classic hero, think about Odysseus from the Odyssey, or even Link from The Legend of Zelda. These characters, they have this sort of mythic quality to them where they outlive their story and everyone knows who they are. One of the stories that gets borrowed a lot from is going to be King Arthur in the Arthurian style. Think Sword in the Stone. This is a tale that is so old that it almost created the hero's journey. J.K. Rowling even lists King Arthur as inspiration for her Harry Potter stories, saying that King Arthur himself is like a spiritual ancestor or successor for Harry. Both characters start from this real mundane world and they enter into a magical world through a mentor. They start from this regular person that may be even mislabeled or unknown ability, and they end up becoming this hero. All that to say is that you can take some things that are seen as tropes or some things that are very familiar and you can twist them and you can use them and you can innovate on them. And if you read Harry Potter, you'll see how so many of these story beats or so many of the character developments for Harry himself, they are used and then innovated upon in an interesting way.
Most of these Arthurian legend types usually start with very, very low character competency. And then as the story progresses, they become more engrossed in this world and this competency grows and you get to watch this person grow into the hero. There's lots of discussions about the hero's journey that talks about how a lot of it mimics what the path of adulthood is alike for a lot of people, where you start off as a kid and a teenager thrown into this world that you don't really understand. Through maturity, you slowly become more comfortable in your own skin. This is part of the reason that this story is so addicting and what you can use to make your heroes more engaging.
The next type would be tragic heroes. These heroes, they don't necessarily want to be heroes of their own story, so they can sometimes seem reluctant, but really they are considered tragic because of their backstory. With Kratos, he seems like an anti-hero at the beginning of his story with the first God of War games. As it progresses into the Norse saga, he becomes this tragic hero because he's really grappling with the things he's done. And then he really deals and grapples with his identity as a father and if he's worthy to be a father and raise a son. Same thing can be said about Ellie from The Last of Us. Specifically in part 2, Ellie is someone who seeks revenge for something that has happened. She thinks she is well equipped and is totally in the right to do the things that she's going to do, and she does a lot of bad things. Again, it's more of an identity question of, is she right to do these things and what is the cost? Paul Atreides is another really well-known example. He is got that chosen one that we talked about with classic, but in this sense it's more tragic because he is forced to do this role. You really get to see how being a hero in this universe takes a toll on him.
The way that I see it, there are 3 main categories within the tragic hero. Most of it depends on when this tragic moment occurs and how it occurs. The first category of tragic hero is this idea of a hero where they make some big mistake and they have to grapple with it throughout the rest of their journey. Usually they have to make this choice near the end, and whether they've grown or not is dependent on the they make the same choice again at the end. When you are writing this kind of character, make sure the big moment doesn't necessarily need to be their fault, but it usually needs to be some kind of product of the choices that they've made. Zuko and Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender are great examples of this. The large tragic moment that happens in Zuko's life is not necessarily his fault, but it is a product of the choices that he makes and the people that he respects. And in this story, he basically has to make the decision whether he's going to put honor and the respect of his father above all else, above his own morality and above the friends that he's made along the way. Iroh is a really interesting example of this because he is a character whose tragic moment happened off screen before the story even starts. This is a really interesting parallel because you can have one character guiding the other character through their tragic moments, not to make the mistakes that they did. The second archetype of this is someone whose tragic moment was done to them, unfairly so, and the story is more about getting recompense for this moment. These stories are usually revenge tales like John Wick or Red Rising. And then usually through this story, you either make the decision of whether they're going to get this revenge or whether they're going to decide to let it go and have forgiveness or something of the sort. Kratos is actually a really interesting example of both of these two archetypes because in the first game, he's more of this revenge type. He's getting revenge for the gods killing his family. But then in the second series, in the more modern God of War, he's more of this first type where he's having to come to terms with the flaws of his character. It's really interesting being able to bounce between these two different types of tragic heroes and how it affects his growth. The third and last type of tragic hero is when the fatal flaw doesn't happen near the beginning, but it happens near the end. This is usually a character that has a fatal flaw that's slowly eating away at them, that they will then make their big tragic moment at the end. Anakin is a great example of this. Macbeth is a great example of this. A lot of the story is slowly trickling to the reader that this is a big flaw that is constantly causing harm to this character, and it's almost a cautionary tale because of it. A lot of what makes tragic heroes so interesting, going back to our three things that make up a hero, is the desire for the character is the big focal point. A lot of the story focuses on this character desire. I had this tragic moment. How does this define what I want? In a revenge tale, it defines them on what they want and how they want to get back at the people that hurted them. Or if it's a story about their fatal flaw, it's how do I deal with this fatal flaw? How do I grow from it? Or how do I make sure that the people around me are not also making the same mistakes that I did?
Next are the Paragon Heroes. These are going to be heroes that almost feel static in how they interact with the world or story. They don't need to change necessarily because they often can be these mentor type figures like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hello there.
Obi-Wan's really cool because he's strictly good. He doesn't really struggle with evil or being tempted by the dark side. Gandalf is another really good one for Paragon. He doesn't really struggle with evil or being tempted. He mentions it briefly with the ring and saying he doesn't want to take the ring because of what it could do. But overall, Gandalf is really acting as that mentor figure that really holds together our heroes. He really represents the good that shines in the dark world. And then there are stories where they almost subvert the expectation for what a Paragon represents for the story. Ned Stark is the tragic, great Paragon hero that really suffers for being just a good character, a good person. That really bleeds well into the theme that Martin set up for his universe of A Song of Ice and Fire, showing that being good doesn't really pay off in this world. So unfortunately, Ned Stark pays the price with his life for trying to do the right thing. And that's just a really good example of showing that the type of hero you choose can really change or affect or show what your world is about and what theme is pushing through into your narrative.
A lot of writing theory talks about the things that make characters interesting is this change, is this evolution and this growth throughout the story. But while Paragons can change, typically their stories are more about changing the world around them rather than they themselves changing. There are stories like Paddington or Luffy from One Piece or Captain America or the classic iterations of Superman. Even Jack Reacher in a lot of ways is this Paragon type. He has small changes throughout the story, but usually he is the beacon of his beliefs and his desires throughout the story. There's a great video that really dives into Jack Reacher as a Paragon. I won't be able to go into it anywhere near as much detail as they did, but check that out if you want to look into it. Paragons really focus on the character. Their character is so unique and so different than the world around them that they are literally changing their entire surroundings. Paddington and Luffy are really good examples of this, where Paddington, just by being polite and by being kind, is making the people around him also become like him. Luffy is another great example of this, where his constant optimism and his constant love of his friends changes these sometimes really heartless people. And as Tyler mentioned earlier with Ned Stark, Paragons are incredible tools when you want to have some kind of thematic meaning with your world. Tolkien is a good example of this, where Frodo in a lot of ways is a paragon, and he is constantly this force of good throughout the story, almost inhumanly so, but then by the end he fails and needs to rely on his friend to be able to succeed on his journey. I think Tolkien is saying really something interesting about goodness here. Even the greatest of intentions is powerless when it is alone.
Now, the reluctant hero might be my favorite type. The hero is often faced with this offer or this challenge to be a hero, and most of the time they're reluctant about it. They don't want to be a hero. Think about Ryland Grace. He's from the recent film Project Hail Mary, also the book. Minor spoilers for that film and book, but there's a really important piece to his character arc that is worth mentioning. About 3/4 through the film, it's revealed that Ryland Grace never wanted to be a hero. He never wanted to board the ship and go save the Earth. He was essentially forced to. The entire time you're thinking that he chose this, he was very heroic, because the ship was not returning, he was going to die. When you're hit with this information, you really grapple with, oh no, Grace isn't the hero in shining armor that I imagined him to be. Other reluctant heroes I've seen are Han Solo and Cloud from Final Fantasy. Both of these characters don't really feel like heroes at their story opening, because they are both trying to just do a job, and they end up getting caught up in a rebellion where there's real stakes and they have something to lose, or they have people they care about. And so they end up growing into the hero. Then you also have heroes in this category that are just very everyday types. Think about Ellen Ripley from Alien, or Furiosa from Mad Max, or Katniss from The Hunger Games. All these characters, they are put into a scenario that is very dangerous, or somewhere they just don't want to be. These are compelling characters because they don't seem like they would be able to do the things they do, but they, like I said, rise to the occasion, and they are inspiring in that sense.
The way that reluctant heroes interact with the three cores, you are taking character desire and cranking it all the way down. And this is a character that wants to do anything other than be put on the story that they're put on. But because of circumstances, they're forced into this role. A lot of the character arc is coming to terms with the fact that they didn't have the volition that they wanted to have when choosing to go on this adventure. It makes for really interesting stories because you have a character outside of their depth. The other end of reluctant heroes that we talked about, the everyday hero, is you're basically taking character competency and cranking that all the way down. Someone like Carl from Dungeon Crawler Carl, he's literally just a man outside in the snow in his boxers when the entire world turns upside down. This is a character who could not be more everyday, but you get to watch as his character competency slowly grows, kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the classic hero. A great example of the reluctant hero is Frieren. This is a character who, while she does want to do something, and while the dramatic question is pushing her to this end point, she literally takes every single chance she can to delay this story. But because it's done so humorously, and because it's done with such interesting characters, we actually don't mind these side paths of the reluctancy constantly rearing its head. This is part of the thing that you have to be really careful with when you're talking about reluctant heroes. If they are too reluctant and pushing too hard against the story, sometimes we can resent that character for slowing down everything. You have to make sure that the ways that they're slowing down the stories are still really compelling and interesting. Or you have this reluctance be very, very short. An example of this is Bilbo from The Hobbit, where he's very, very reluctant in the beginning, and there's this very interesting scene with the dwarves throwing all the plates around, and he's constantly in the state of just wanting to go back to his normalcy. But in this one moment of deciding to be a hero, he runs and wants to be on his journey. This is still a reluctant hero, but you're getting over that point very, very quickly. When you are talking about about everyday heroes, a lot of what gives them this power is taking a character that is not fit for the story that you are writing and forcing them into this role. A good practice for most writers is to write your plot first and then choose a character that in many ways does not slot into that puzzle piece and try to write the story from their point of view and see how that changes the plot that you were trying to write. An interesting example of this, there is a silly film called Laser Team from a few years back, where there is this alien tournament where different planets take a champion from their planet and fight them against another planet. The planet Earth has this power armor that they're going to give to their champion that they have been training for years since birth, and they have this power armor, but it gets knocked out of the sky and drunk idiots basically put on different parts of this power armor. This completely diverts the person that probably should have been the hero and puts these characters who are very, very unfit for this role into this story, but makes for really interesting conflict because of it. This is an extreme example, but try to use this when you're trying to write these everyday heroes. Make sure that you're not making things too easy for them. Make sure that there is conflict and barbs rubbing between the conflict of the story and the character that you're putting in that role. The last type that we're going to be talking about is the anti-hero. There is basically two main definitions. The classic version of anti-hero is more just a character who does not exhibit heroic attributes. Interesting examples of this are like Don Quixote, where he's literally crazy throughout most of the story. The more pop culture version of this is basically just a very edgy hero who believes that the ends justify the means. We're going to be talking a little bit about classic, but mostly we're going to be focusing on the pop culture understanding of anti-hero because that's what most people understand it as.
Geralt from The Witcher is one of my favorite protagonists. I actually struggled on where to put him in these types. I think we both landed that he's closest to the anti-hero type because he is a morally gray character that will follow the money, basically. Like wherever he is hired, he's going to go and take care of it. The world often feels darker than what he exhibits or what he's talking about or what he's doing, and it helps to sort of soften the blow for who Geralt is as this morally gray character. He seems like a better character than a lot of the things that are happening around him, whether it's a political thing or even just monsters. A lot of times the monsters are just evil or wicked or they're just killing other people, so Geralt gets to save the day. Another one of my favorites is Dexter. I love him because he tries to justify the means in a very anti-hero type way. He actually tries to be the Paragon and tries to justify being a Paragon type, just doing it in very terrible means. And the same can be said for Walter White from Breaking Bad. He enjoys being this big bad guy that pushes around other people.
Both the classic version and the pop culture version of anti-heroes basically focus really hard on the character, but almost on the opposite side of the Paragon that we talked about earlier. In a lot of ways, the anti-hero is the flip side of the coin of the Paragon, where you have a character who has a very strong desire, but because of who they are, they approach that desire in a very, very specific way. The main things that I think writers need to look out for is making sure that your morally gray character is making decisions that are still empathetic to the reader. Now, they don't need to be empathetic all the time. You can definitely cross that line, but when the moment that your reader totally gives up on your character, you've lost your story. And a lot of this is making sure that the world that this anti-hero is in feels darker than they themselves do as the character. The moment that you don't, make sure that it is on purpose. You can have a character like Walter White, who is in a very unfair world, but he becomes this person who's darker than the world around him, and it makes for a very interesting arc. He almost turns into the villain throughout the story. Now, not every story is like that. Some of them are just a person who is trying to do the right thing, but the world is unfair. They have to fight evil with evil. Now, there are still really interesting ways to make these characters. A lot of modern versions of this, they will take another character who's more of a paragon and pair them up with this anti-hero, and it makes for very interesting conflict. The other way to make these characters still really fresh is putting them in a position that means that they have to be the evil that they are, otherwise they would not be able to survive in this this world. An example of this is Glocta from The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is a character who is handicapped in a lot of ways, and the only way that he can survive and the only way that he can use his skill set is in this very dark, gory, and violent way. And because he is so unique, we forgive him almost because it's so interesting to be in his head and see the nuance of his own moral compass. Now, wrapping this up, these archetypes are just categories. Don't feel too slavish to these categories. Make sure that you are approaching heroes with the same delicacy that you are every other aspect and every other thing of your story. I think it's very easy to be so focused on these other elements of your story that you kind of push your hero off to the side as this is just the lens that the reader is seeing the story, and I don't need to put a lot of thought into it. The most interesting settings and the most interesting plots can fall flat if we don't care about the person that's going through these worlds.
Heroes are complex. A lot of these heroes that we've mentioned, they sort of jump between a lot of these types, meaning that the characters don't have to sit in one box and stay there. They can be in flux, or they can evolve or devolve even. Indiana Jones may have started as a classical type hero, but he sometimes feels like a morally gray hero. And then he has, in his later journeys, grapples with some of the things he's done to be more of a tragic hero. The heroes will, in some sense, like I said in the beginning, define your story. So choose your hero with intention and where they start their journey. Always remembering that the reader, the viewer, whatever we are, we understand them and that we want to root for them. And that's going to keep us going to the end. So we hope that helps, and we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, if you really like this video, check the one down below. You might like that one too.
And if you really like what you see, click here to subscribe.